All right, guys, welcome to episode 52 of Mark Anthony's Music Picks. Today I'm going to focus in on one of my old tech house heroes from the 2000s era, from around 2000 to 2010 was really the golden era for this producer, and that is Matt Edwards, aka Radio Slave. Matt is a very prolific producer. He puts out an absolute ton of content, but for me, the absolute golden era and the sweet spot of Matt Edwards' back catalog is from 2005 to 2010. And in 2005, Matt started making a very specific brand of Matt Edwards, aka Radio Slave, tech house. And he kind of like blew the scene open with these loopy 9 or 10 minute Radio Slave distinct sound type jams that he was making. And for a while, I remember on Trance Addict, he just dominated. People were talking about him all the time in the music discussion forums. And hey, did you hear the new Radio Slave remix that's coming out of this or that? And his original productions were good, specifically the No Sleep series, which I'm going to cover a little bit today. But his remixes are where he just crushed it. And a lot of times you'd be out at the club and you'd hear a track and you'd say, man, that sounds like a Radio Slave remix. And then, 2-3 months later, you'd see the sample pop up on Juno, or you'd get wind of it in one way or another, and you're like, that's the one I heard. I knew that was Radio Slave. So I'm going to go through some of the tracks chronologically that really brought Matt to the front of the scene and brought all of that tech house really to the forefront. Matt also, like I said, he produces a lot. He also had other aliases that he used. He had the Quiet Village alias, where he would do almost like abstract, slow, down-tempo disco, like when the slow-mo disco really started to kick in maybe 2009. He was doing that. He has the Cabin Fever alias, where he goes a little bit more abstract and experimental, or maybe on Cabin Fever he might remake an old vocal into a modern house track. And more recently he's done a lot of techno, and he does like weird analogy, not almost like goofy sounding techno, mentally screwy techno. I don't know how else to call it. Some of the stuff that he puts out on records, it sounds like it's designed to just kind of mess with people's ears. Just a lot of analog effects and very creative and weird stuff. It's not my style. Like I said, the 2005 to 2010 tech house is really where he hit home with me. So the first title I want to talk about today is one of his most famous, and I think this is where chronologically, if you look at his back catalog, he was making like remixes of almost like tribal and house in 2004, and then in 2005 he did this re-edit of Carl Craig's Darkness. Now the original Carl Craig Darkness came out on Carl Craig's Just Another Day EP in 2004, which was an ambient experimental EP with 4 tracks on it, and the original Darkness was really good. It's beatless, but it accomplished a lot with its dynamics and the sinister sense that it created. It's a very good track. Then in 2005, Carl Craig made a club-friendly mix of it called the Max Mix, and that sold a couple thousand copies. If you want to look on Planet E, that was also a very popular record. But if I had the chance to play either the Max Mix or this Radio Slave, it's Radio Slave all the way. This is where Matt came into that 9 or 10 minute tech house formula. It's almost like he stumbled onto it or figured something out when he was producing and just knocked it out of the park. So you've got all the darkness and sinister strings that Carl Craig is capable of, plus the Matt Edwards remix formula really making its first debut here and really coming out to shine. highly recommend this. Now there's 3 versions of this on Discogs. 2 of them are blocked for sale. I think this one you can actually still buy. It's either this one or another one, but it's still the same track on it, so you'll be good there. Matt's next Crazy Bomb remix came out in 2006, and he remixed Peace Division's Blacklight Sleaze. Now, the record I'm holding here is a 2012 reissue of Radio Slave's Blacklight Sleaze, but the original came out on NRK, the NRK house label, in 2006, and it had a girl in it. The original Blacklight Sleaze was a female vocal that was describing as if she were a bartender or an employee or maybe a stripper at a strip club, and describing the scene in accurate detail, almost like poetic fashion, about how despicable the scene was, how she had to interact with these men, but she had contempt for them at the same time. And she even gets down into the nitty gritty of describing, the peanuts and, in the glass jar sitting on the bar, and the way that the men move, and how creepy and seedy the atmosphere is. And Radio Slave came in over top of that and dropped seriously one of the most sinister, heavy remixes, oh my gosh, out of his catalog. The bass in this, you might not hear it if you're listening to my episode here on your phone. You might hear like a little click on the kick drum, but the kicks and the bass in this are just huge. This is like a like blow the roof off the club at 3 a.m. and like feel it in your chest type track. This thing's a monster.
Sometimes I wonder what I'm doing here in the middle of this Times Square room, filled with smoke and damp carpet, soggy with spilled cheap champagne, with the mirrors and flashing lights and plastic bowls half full of salted peanuts and their discarded shells. In this room with tired waitresses, lousy overpriced drinks,
so grab this. The original NRK started to go up in price, and then they did the reissue, so you should be able to get this for a reasonable price. And I can comment on the mastering of this. The reissue sounds really nice. This is good. I actually just rocked it last night before I made this. Next up is a record in 2006 that kicked off Matt's No Sleep series. This is No Sleep #1, and I'm going to take it out of its plastic sleeve here because I want you to see how horrific this cover is. This is the world's most horrendous, possibly, album cover ever. It looks like a guy that had frostbite on his foot, and Matt used it for a single cover. I don't know why. I mean, it's absolutely horrific. But the tracks on here are great. I picked Wheeze. There's 2 tracks, Wheeze and Modena. I picked Wheeze because Wheeze I had a special moment with. I used to play warehouse gigs when I was in my DJ prime. And I played this warehouse gig in Philly, and I spent so much time preparing for the gig. Like, I didn't premeditate it, but I had my records. I brought about 50 records with me, and I had it culled to, like, if I play any of these, this is gonna be a great set. And this was one of the highlights of when I really started to kick my my set into gear, was Wheeze, because it has a very weird and wonky. It was like 2006 was when minimal really started to go nuts and get really weird and crazy. And Wheeze, I feel like, typified that minimal sound with the low horn that kind of hits in there, like womp 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 womp. Right? You'll hear that. And when that first dropped, because it was in a warehouse, like, people, like, it had reverb on it, and also it was a brand new track. Like, this had just come out that week. And I remember people were just like, what the hell is this? I actually have old VHS tape of it. Like, somebody was there with a camcorder when I dropped this, and you can just see, like, it got a crowd reaction. Maybe I'll edit that into the video. I'll have to think about that. But anyways, there was also another track on here, Modena, which I did play in that set, but I'm not going to give you a sample of. This was also a great example of Radio Slave looping out a really nice loop over 9 or 10 minutes and Two really good tracks on here, and I looked, and this thing is dirt cheap now, so you can get this for like $4 if you find a good deal on it. I highly recommend this. Matt also continued on. I want to say I'm not going to feature any other from the No Sleep series, but I also like No Sleep numbers 4 and 5. So if you want to check those out, if you can get a deal on them. The track K-Maze I almost featured in this, but I decided not to. I just want to give you like the absolute cream of the crop. K-Maze is another nice track if you wanted to add some more Radio Slave to your collection. And next up, we're now to 2008, and I'm going to feature a remix of one of my favorite artists. I've done a couple of Danny Tenaglia episodes already because I just love the guy and he's a local hero for me. And here he did his track, The Space Dance. Now, if you're familiar with the original version of Space Dance, what Danny did was he took his like hard New York tribal deep sound and he basically took a vocal concept from Yellow's track Boss Ditch, which came out in 1984. And the guy does this like really quick sputtering, choppy vocal, like almost like a trick or a gimmick, the way that he reads out the lyrics. And Danny took that and somehow manufactured his own version of it with a male voice where instead of saying whatever the guy says in Boss Ditch, he says dance, space, dance.
Standing at the machine every day for all my life, I used to do it and I need it. It's the only thing I want is just to rush, push, cash.
That is where Space Dance was born from. That's where that hook came from. Now on the remix pack here, there's actually some really good stuff on here. If you're a fan of tribal, I recommend this double pack. It's easy to get. The That Kid Chris remix, I remember being really good, but Radio Slave crushed this, and he went hard on this. This is a big room monster. You still have Danny's original rattlesnake voodoo rattle tribal drum going off on the background where it's just like hitting like really fast in the background. You'll hear that in the sample, and just a huge kick and the classic Radio Slave treatment. And big surprise, it's between 10 and 11 minutes long. That was the Radio Slave formula back then. And the last track that I want to feature for you is, now we're up to 2010, is a little bit lighter, and I picked this because I wanted to represent Radio Slave's lighter side. Now here the track is I Don't Need a Cure for This, and it's almost like the mid-range of this track. It's almost like it levitates. It's as if it were hovering over the ground but not touching it, and it just sort of like moves and interacts, but It's hard to describe. It's almost like I would want to listen to this if I were needing motivation or some kind of serenity while doing a difficult task. So I could picture like maybe a BMX rider that has his AirPods in and he's doing tricks and he's trying to make a run, but he needs calmness while he's executing a very difficult task. I could see it being good for that. Or a snowboarder that's going down the mountain and needs to hit tricks and kind of get into a Zen state. That's the kind of vibe that this creates here. That's all I have for today's episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Check out Radio Sleeve's old remixes. A lot of them are really cheap now, so if you're a fan of Tech House, I highly recommend them. Matt, thank you so much for the awesome tunes over the years. I still check out your records all the time. I wouldn't mind if you came back and hit up some of those old Tech House styles that you used to do and, maybe just throw us a bone. Thank you so much, and take care, guys. Peace.